Hey guys, Hastings here and welcome to this Saturday special. And I'm starting today's special with this, the 1976 Team Mclaren M23. Now, if you're going to go and race in R-Class, as we established in Rapid Racing quite recently, there's not a huge selection of cars to choose from. There's not a pitiful amount, but there's nowhere near as many as in A-Class or even S-Class or B or whatever. And if you want to race sort of an open wheel car or a classic race car up there, you've basically got a choice of two. You've got this, which is generally the one I go to, or you've got the Scuderia, I think that's how you say it, Ferrari 312 T2, also from the 1976 Formula 1 season. And the reason, well, there's basically two reasons why I generally go for this over the Ferrari, this McLaren. And the first one is, it's a McLaren, and I'm British, so it's kind of, that's what I go for. Why not? And secondly, I just think it looks nicer. The Ferrari, the front wings raised up above the bottom of the nose cone, and it's just not as aesthetically pleasing as this McLaren is. So I figured, I wonder if I'm making the right choice. What if the Ferrari's like a million times better? Although they've got the same performance index rating, but fours are always lies, they're never the same. So I thought I'd take them around Long Beach, because that's the only track on the game that they actually ran in 76 season, and see which one was faster. Now I took the McLaren first, because that is the car that I wanted to set the benchmark with, because it's the one that I typically go for. And when I was driving it, I started to think, I've obviously driven this a few times before, but what can I really say about it that's interesting, and what would you notice if you jumped in it for the first time? And the first thing to notice is, especially if you run in cockpit view, is the windscreen. It's very heavily tinted yellow, which is really annoying, because the wing mirrors are behind, as it were, the windscreen. So everything in the wing mirrors is tinted yellow as well, which is rather a pain. And it does suffer slightly on visibility. But you sort of jump in, and for a sort of, 450 horsepower car, 465 to be exact, but close enough, it actually drives rather nicely, and that must be partly to those huge rear tyres. And those huge rear tyres do actually sort of cause a little bit of an issue. You may have seen a few seconds ago that I clipped the wall with the rear tyre. I was doing that a few times in my early run. Now I must say at this point I gave each of the cars 10 laps to set a lap time. And as I was driving around, especially coming out of the roundabout or just running close to the wall, I'm trying to get as close to the wall as possible, sort of take the best lines I can. And because the rear wheels stick out a lot more than the front does, I was finding myself clipping the walls a few times, which was slightly annoying. But overall, it was pretty standard. For an old Formula 1 car, I thought it drove and handled very, very nicely. And I'm struggling to think of much more to say about it that's sort of significant. So let's just cut it short there and move on to the Ferrari. In terms of statistics, these cars are very similar, but I'd say that the Ferrari maybe has slightly better statistics. The Ferrari has 35 extra horsepower, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when these cars both weigh less than 1,200 pounds, 1,300 pounds, sorry, they both weigh 1,268 pounds. That's quite significant in the terms of sort of power to weight department. The McLaren though does have an extra, I think it's just over 20 extra torques. Yeah, 24 extra torques. So it does sort of have a bit of an advantage there, but I'd say that the extra power that Ferrari has sort of outweighs the extra torque from the McLaren. So in that respect, you'd expect it to be slightly quicker. And in driving this car, you can sort of notice the extra power, because technically everything else about the car should be pretty much the same. They ran to the same rules and regulations when they were racing against each other. And this Ferrari did have a lot more wheel spin, which I'm going to attribute to the extra power, which kind of meant it was difficult to drive when you first jumped into it. In the McLaren, I set the lap time, or a very close lap time to it, very early on, and I was just sort of getting close to it and slightly taking a little bit of time off it and then getting close to it. And I was very consistent and very early on was I set in my lap time, and it's easy to jump in and set a competitive time. I think I only improved it by about 3/10 from lap 2. That's how easy it was. I jumped in, my first lap was one of my quickest, my first flying lap. In this, my first few laps were terrible. If I managed to get it round in one piece, which I was often spinning and clipping the walls, again due to the size of the rear tyres, but it took me a long time to sort of, it would go over the 10 laps. I think it was about lap 7 that I finally got in a comparative lap time to the Mclaren. And then all of a sudden I was like, okay, I can drive this now, and I managed to push it and push it and push it, and set a very decent lap time. And the lap time that I actually managed to set was a 1:18.7, which was about 3/4 of a second faster than the Mclaren, and that surprised me because this isn't a particularly long track, which means that that's 7/10 of a second. I'd say that's more than just driver error or driver variation, especially considering I was very consistent in the Mclaren, and in this I was sort of building up to it. I think I was actually slightly faster as well on my last lap, but I clipped a wall somewhere, and because it had the invalid sign, I couldn't see what the time was as I came over the line. But in terms of sitting in the car, in comparison to the Ferrari, it's not as nice a place to sit, in my opinion. You've got this weird roll bar you might be able to see in some of the close-ups that sticks out in front of you that you can see behind the steering wheel. That's the one. But contrary to the McLaren, you don't have a yellow windscreen that tints everything yellow. So that is that is one massive benefit. Neither of these cars like the curbs. You can see me going over it there and not taking to it too well. So I was very intrigued as to why this Ferrari was so much, or seemed so much faster than the McLaren, even though it was difficult to drive. And I figured with the extra wheel spin and the extra power, well, surely it's just got better acceleration. If you look at the stats that Forza give it, the acceleration stat is technically the same, but the handling is better and the braking is better, which I find bonkers, because if anything, it was the other way around. The handling and the braking in the McLaren seemed nicer, although maybe that's just in contrast to the wheel spin that you get in the Ferrari. I don't know. But yeah, the stats are pretty much identical according to Forza, but as I said before, Forza can lie. Forza does lie. You can get cars on the same that are different. But to find out if it was the acceleration that was making a difference, we took these cars for a drag race, and off the line, the McLaren seemed to get the better launch. But rather quickly, the Ferrari would gradually, and I mean gradually, just sort of catch up and very slowly, slightly pull away. And it was, I guess, due to the wheel spin that it got a slightly worse launch. And I'm going to slow this bit down here because otherwise you can't see how close it is across the line. But we're within a car length. If anything, my front wing, I'm in the McLaren, is in line with the rear wing. So that might have been it. But so we decided to take them to Yas Marina and race them to see how they fared in an actual race scenario. And once again, I was driving my favoured McLaren. And basically, we went to Yas Marina because I thought it was slightly ironic to take the old Formula 1 cars to the newest Formula 1 track that we could. And thanks to Forza's amazing track list, yeah, we settled with Yas Marina. The Ferrari managed to get a slightly better run through the very first section, but the McLaren was holding on. I don't know, I wouldn't have thought that this track would suit the McLaren more, because when you compare it to Long Beach, it's got more straight lines and more sort of big acceleration points, which you would have thought would favour the Ferrari. On this note of straight line speed, if the McLaren got in the slipstream of the Ferrari, I was able to jump out of that, close up, and get up the inside, as I have done just there. Although on this occasion, I didn't quite manage to capitalise it, although I did manage to stay in the slipstream for the run down the next part of the straight. And it was quite a general theme running through this race. The McLaren was just so much more consistent. You can see that Ferrari got out of shape under braking going into the chicane there. But the McLaren was, like I said, more consistent, easier to drive. It was generally, I don't know, the brakes on the car, we were both able to outbrake each other at different points depending on who was in the lead, who was carrying more speed or whatever. So they were pretty much the same. But the McLaren was easier to drive. But the Ferrari, when the driver could hold it together, was definitely the slightly faster car. Although, like, we did 5 laps around here. And for the first 4 laps, we just sort of waited for each other. We just had a bit of a battle to see how they'd fare in close proximity with each other. And generally, the Ferrari would come out on top. And see, you're going past in a straight line there. However, as soon as I was putting the Ferrari under a bit of pressure, I don't know, it was kind of like, it's kind of difficult to explain, but the Ferrari was making more mistakes. Not massively significant ones, although there were a few of those as well, but just little mistakes, like getting out of shape under braking and things like that. And it just enabled the McLaren to just sort of not create a gap to it, but just keep up with it and stay right in the mix. And I was having absolutely no problems in the McLaren. I mean, like I say, I do jump in the McLaren more often than any other R-Class car, probably. Oh, excuse me, I'm getting some hiccups. And I don't think the guy that I got to drive a Ferrari has driven it at all, if anything, so that will obviously play a factor. You can see there, though, the Ferrari's just getting a bit out of shape. And I hadn't driven the Ferrari, apart from doing the 2 laps, the 2 cars laps around Long Beach, I hadn't driven either of these cars in a while either. But it was a general theme, and this is coming on to the last lap now. We decided to bunch up and go for a proper 1 lap sprint, no waiting for each other, no just battling for the sake of it and getting good images to see, to film for you guys, so you can watch some battling as I'm talking. But no, we're just going to go no holds barred and see what we can do. And around the first sector, although I started slightly ahead because I seemed to get fair better in the battles, I actually managed to create a little bit of a gap. I wanted to get a good aligners run in through the hairpin as possible, and did the Ferrari. Tried to take all of the track and a little bit more, and just so that I could sort of get him out of my slipstream, because he's slightly quicker anyway. If he gets in my slipstream, I know he's going past. But it does look like I've managed to gain enough of a gap, and my voice is killing me right now, so I apologise if I sound a bit dodgy. I need to go and have a drink. Yeah, going into the braking zone, I don't take the best line through there, and the Ferrari does manage to close up slightly under braking. Neither of us take a particularly good line through the second part of there. And going down to the second sort of long curved straight, as it were, I have pretty much the same gap that I had a very short time ago. And going down into this corner here, I brake slightly late and go very wide, allowing the Ferrari, sorry, I'm in McLaren, I should know that, to close up, although it gets a little bit out of shape there as it clips the curb. These cars really did not like the curbs. I actually did an extra set of laps in the McLaren because I forgot to save the replay on one of them. And in the first run, I got so far on 2 wheels on one of them. I have a big mistake on the curb there, and the Ferrari has an incident as well. But that enabled my McLaren to jump into the lead and around the last corners, and the Ferrari just couldn't catch up. So we are back to where we started with this McLaren. It will continue to be my car of choice out of the 2 because it looks better, it sounds better, and it's easier to drive. If I was driving it consistently or a large amount, go for the Ferrari. It's definitely quicker once you can tame it. But if you're just jumping in for the odd time, choose the McLaren. It's definitely the car for me. So with that, Hastings out. Goodbye.